All right, let's get started. I'm not certain that Kevin's coming or not. We think so, but we have a quorum with Maura on the phone. So I'll call the meeting to order. Can we begin with the Pledge of Allegiance? Maura, are you there? What happened?
We've lost her.
All right.
What's the background noise?
All right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So right now we don't have,
We do not have a quorum. She's
there
back.
she is, okay.
We just said the pledge, you haven't.
Projector, is the PC hooked up to?
It is, it's on HDMI, so I don't,
Okay, I'll check it here.
okay, sorry.
All right, so I'd like to amend the agenda so that, with respect from our friends from PFM, take care of some business first. We appreciate it. So I don't know if I need a motion for that, but moved and seconded and approved.
Yes.
All right, great.
Absolutely.
So the first is the approval of the minutes. These are extensive minutes from the public hearing for the town budgets. Great amount of detail. I think they properly reflect what happened, unless somebody's comments were mischaracterized, which I don't know. I mean, it's pretty factual, so,
I went through.
all right. So I would move that we adopt those minutes as submitted.
Okay.
All in favor? Aye. Aye, all right. Thanks, Maura. Approval of the tax collector suspense list. Melissa, do you want to speak to this, or?
Sure, so this is something that's prepared annually for taxes that are deemed as uncollectible. Most of them are motor vehicle taxes. They still will remain collectible for 15 years, and they've been sent to a collection agency for those that are motor vehicle taxes. And for those that are personal property, they've been turned over to the state marshal for collection, so.
So we go through this every year. Just because we do this function, it helps the accounting treatment for these, but it doesn't mean we stop pursuing or that this money is waived. So I think it's appropriate for us to do this and recommend someone make a motion to approve the list.
I'll make a motion that we approve the list as presented.
Second?
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Hebner. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Great, thank you. Before we go any further, what's that?
Just have you sign it before.
Yeah, thank you. Great, thanks. I just wanted to welcome Amy Merriweather, our, I don't know what the status of your actual title, and also want to thank Chris Hutton, who continues to act as interim Director of Finance, and Amy will be the Director of Finance at some point when
Next week.
Next week? Okay, great.
Congrats.
Tuesday.
But we're delighted to have her, and we've been more than well served by Chris's help in the transition, and I think it's been great. Awesome. Thank you, guys. All right.
Welcome.
So the next item is the transfer of Eversource rebate funds to Streetlight Capital Fund and request for supplemental appropriation. Want to speak to this?
Sure, so the rebate that came in was as part of the streetlight project. As you know, back in 2016, we purchased our streetlights from Eversource and then undertook a project to convert the lights to LEDs. So this rebate was part of that project. It has, I'll let Chris speak to this in more detail, but this is an accounting issue. It went into the general fund. It's more appropriate to have it in the capital fund that we had set up for street lighting improvements. So that's
Okay.
just a bit.
And Lisa, you had a question or comments?
Yeah, a couple questions. So that was not part of our revenue stream when we approved the project, so it would appropriately go to the general fund. I'm okay with putting it in the capital, but I want to be clear, that was not what we voted for.
Okay, it was
And-
my understanding from speaking with, I wasn't here obviously, from speaking with Tom Roy and that they had expected the rebate to come back in.
So it may be that that was the expectation. I don't see it in the thing. So, I mean, I'm okay if it goes there, but I don't see that that's what was actually approved, and maybe I have that wrong, and I'm open to that. And, I mean, we had an expenditure that is approved. Was that included in the expenditure that we voted on, or no? How are we funding this?
How are we funding? There was actually a deficit in that fund which brought this to light.
Okay, so this is
So
just,
we needed it to zero out this fund and provide additional
Okay.
funds for a replacement of another light pole or addition of another light pole. And in the absence of any other money that has been appropriated to replace the actual LED lights, it would serve for that purpose too.
Okay,
it's
so-
inappropriate.
that makes sense to me. That makes complete sense to me, okay. And then,
It highlighted right away when I saw this negative in this fund, so.
so that may have been the intention all along, it just didn't get communicated, so that, and that's perfectly fine, that happens. I just wanted to make sure that.
So we we approved a capital project to buy lights that were LED, that was gonna save us money going forward.
Right.
So we spent money on a capital asset, and then we got back rebates, which helped pay, either helped pay for the capital
Or go
project,
to the general.
or is revenue, a revenue source offsetting the depreciation in essence of that. And so we're putting it into the fund,
We're leaving it, we're gonna.
into the capital fund? Okay.
Do we need to
For future
make a motion
use,
to
and
change?
then I know you're perhaps
Excuse me.
doing a special revenue fund later on, and that would be appropriate too. But since it was already this capital fund that really needed the resources now,
And for the capital project approved, so that makes sense.
for that
But in
particular-
terms of routine maintenance, my concern is you don't use a capital fund for
I
routine
understand.
maintenance. So I would want to, if we're going to do a long-term maintenance plan, and I would want more information on that because we had budgeted that into the operating budget, so is
And
that,
it could be held strictly for a replacement pole as opposed to light bulbs, so it wasn't just maintenance.
yeah, I would be hesitant to do the both together in one fund because you do the capital fund is for capital projects and maintenance, and I would just, it's easy to blur the two. Moira, I'm sorry, I didn't mean.
Yeah, I'm with Lisa on this line here.
Moira agrees with Lisa.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So, let me make sure I got your position on this, Lisa, correct. You're okay with this accounting treatment one time?
Correct.
And if this becomes an ongoing revenue source, it should be, we will put it into the general fund. We're not, right? We're not going to permanently change. Is that true?
As I understand, this is a one-time revenue
It's a
source.
one-time.
Yes.
Yeah, but in terms of maintenance costs, we shouldn't be using our capital,
And, right, you should be
Account.
budgeting, I believe, 15,000 a year.
which we have. We've done 26 on our streetlights. I'm curious,
I don't know.
There's a small amount of maintenance, I think it's 8,000 baked into the street lighting, whatever the line
Line
item
item.
is that Public Works has.
yes.
But it's not nearly the level that he'd like it at to be able to have enough for projected maintenance. And maintenance is gonna be so variable over time, we're not gonna know what we're gonna need year to year in terms of maintaining the lights. Anything could happen if a car hits a pole or something, so, we do have a little bit budgeted for maintenance, Tom said, but
Yeah,
I don't think it's to that level.
and that was just an error, an oversight that we didn't, because we knew that this was coming.
Well, I guess, is it
Okay.
in the general fund as an income item? As it coming back?
Expense- As an expense item?
Well, no, it's coming back, so did we budget that it was coming back into the general fund?
It wasn't budgeted. to
Okay,
go back.
okay.
There was no
Then
budget
that's a
for it.
little less complicated then.
But in terms of the annual expenses, there are two things there. We have budgeted 26,000 for streetlights in the current budget. Part of that is
Part of
maintenance.
that is a small, yeah, about a third of it, I think, is for maintenance.
Okay, what is the appropriate amount we should be budgeting for maintenance?
15,000, I think
I
is,
think 15,000
yeah.
was what.
So we're short
Maybe.
7,000? We
I
don't know.
can't answer.
Okay.
Or does it come out of another line item?
So, and then the next question, I know that when we had the insurance company, the insurance commission had met and talked about whether this was going to be covered by insurance, and it was highlighted to Mr. Kimball that some of this would be if it's on town property if a pole breaks, but in others, we needed an additional rider, and I just wanted to make sure that that happened, and that we budgeted for that. And you may not know that
Yeah, I
today, and
don't, but I can-
this
yeah.
occurred to me last night, so I
Okay.
found that last night. So if you could just bring it to our next meeting.
Sure, okay.
That would be great.
Okay, so we need a motion for this one-time accounting treatment.
And this is not to be used for maintenance, but for purchase.
Correct.
Okay.
Can we make that are we gonna make that restriction on it right now?
I think
mean,
we,
unless we're continually following up on it, I don't know if we wanna.
I don't think it's appropriate, and I agree with Moira, to do it in the capital fund. We would have to create a special revenue fund if we want to do a maintenance fund
Where
over
does it
time.
come out of what other budget line item does it come out of if you can't do the, maintenance out of
Well,
this?
it should come out of here, and it would be an overage that we would then have to do a transfer on later, is that right?
Okay.
And that's a little bit more, consistent with what we budgeted, and we do have the reserves to do that. So rather than go through the process of a special revenue fund. I mean, we can do
Yeah.
that over time if you guys make that recommendation. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not against it, but I just think we need to think about it a little more before we do that today, so.
This is zeroed out
Been
now
agreement.
as far as past expenses and going forward, if there's anything in the next year or whatever, that's capital expense.
Right.
And
So we're zeroing out the capital account that had a deficit in it. Is that what we're doing?
Yes.
Is there a surplus or is it?
Yes.
Okay.
It was
By how
only,
much?
the grant was 73,000 or whatever, and it now has 67,000, I believe, so it wasn't huge,
Okay.
but it wasn't negative.
Okay.
And seemed appropriate.
No, it's absolutely an appropriate use of the funds, and I appreciate that.
Okay, so
I'm good.
somebody gonna move?
If you
There's a-
would help us
Yeah.
for the
Yeah, there's a
motion.
suggested motion,
Pardon me.
the cover sheet to that. I don't know if sorry, the pages aren't numbered, but
It may need to be adjusted because we're not going to do it for the maintenance, right?
so the motion, I don't know if
Yeah.
you see it there, it's
Yeah,
under
yeah.
number 4.
So, yeah, do you wanna make it or? That's
Hold on.
fine.
Where is it actually? Oh, it's italicized.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So that's just the capital. We're not creating
You need to
maintenance
caveat it,
from
right.
that.
Right.
Okay. I move effective January 20th, 2018, to approve the transfer of $72,322 in Eversource rebate funds from the general fund to the existing streetlight capital fund for capital improvements, and approve the supplemental appropriation of $72,322.
Derek, do you want to second that?
I'll second that.
And all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Maura? Okay,
All right.
thank you. So then the last action item is discussion and approval of the capital asset policy, with special thanks to Chris for helping draft that. This basically fills the need for tracking assets and buying and selling or disposing of them. Something we didn't have any, or was it just in bad shape?
We had an older version of this that we realized was never formally adopted by the Board of Finance. So we took the opportunity to just give it a critical look and revise it and then actually have it formally adopted, so.
So do you have questions on this also, Lisa?
My only question would be is if we adopt this, and I believe this was drafted by the Board of Finance before I got on it and updated by you, is if we adopt this, will this have any impact on next year's budget if we follow it? Are we doing it consistent already?
I'm aware of. no.
Okay.
It's tracking your assets, having thresholds for depreciation, and it might affect the depreciation schedule, but I don't expect that it will. I haven't had a chance to look at capital assets at all yet.
Yeah, I know that's being inventoried as we speak, so that's certainly understandable. I saw that the roads, and I know that this is consistent with the Gatsby recommendation, but the roads were 30 to 50 years, and we view our road cycle as more 17 to 19 years, so is that, we just use that because it's the Gatsby?
That's a Gatsby.
Okay.
And when I was in Holland, we used the same thing. It is covered.
I mean, I know that's what they recommend, it just doesn't seem consistent with our,
Nobody's roads last
okay,
that long.
right, okay.
It was written a long time ago.
Okay. Does that need to be adjusted, or we're just going to go with Gatsby at this point? Okay.
It is. We don't really take roads off and put roads on. We really don't.
Okay, just wanted to make sure.
Any questions or comments, Maura?
No, I would just concur that we should follow what Gatsby said.
Agreed. All right, so I would be looking for a motion to adopt the capital asset policy as presented in draft form.
So moved.
Second.
Seconded by Lisa. All in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you. And then we have this regarding the unanticipated revenue. Do we
Oh,
need
yeah.
to vote on
No,
this?
both of these communications items are just, there's no action needed. They were just more informational. The first one is a memo about just a reminder about the extra revenue we are going to receive from the state because of the revenues that were adopted with this final state budget were about $670,000 higher than what we had budgeted. So just kind of food for thought for now, just some ideas of starting to think through how we might want to handle that additional revenue. So just informational for now, no action required.
Rob, question for you.
Okay.
Do you have a question on that one, or?
I do.
Okay, go ahead.
Rob, I believe you're on the pension.
I'm not anymore. Derek
Derek,
is.
oh, Derek, I know there was some talk about reducing the assumption rate, investment assumption rate, and I think you guys are looking at that possibly for November. And if we have extra money, I would just put out there for our board to consider that might be an appropriate use if we reduce it to phase that in over a couple of years, use that money to get us to the right investment assumption rate. That would be a high priority for me. So it's, again, no action, but as we think about useful sources of where to put that money, to me, that would be a good use of that.
I'm getting to know how Maria works and the coincidence of that money and the interest rate assumption and the options are coincidentally in the same communication. But I would agree with you that of the options being considered, that would be the one that I think would be a priority. So we will look at that for a subsequent meeting, but.
Thank you.
And it's good news that we have this increase from the state. It's early.
It is early.
But I think I said this at the last meeting, it coincides with the $1 million of using general reserves. Now we've sort of, in fact, actually highlighted where that was coming from so that we don't have this cliff issue. If we had perfect vision, we might have thought a little harder about the mill rate, but I think it's not enough significantly to reopen that. We don't really have that opportunity, so.
So that's
Stay
it.
tuned.
Yeah, so that speaks to the second communication that's in there, and that's a memo we sent to the Retirement Plan Subcommittee following their last meeting, which was in May. They meet again in September, but I think it's for the November meeting that our actuary will have figures for us to show what it would look like, what the budget impact would be to reduce the interest rate assumption. So we would have that information available for the tri-board meeting in November and then for the budget planning.
Can you remind me what the assumption rate is
Right now it's
currently?
7.
It's 7, and we're looking to reduce it to 6.75.
We're gonna have her model,
Couple different.
yeah.
I mean, just in light of the Fed acting and communicating that it'll be continuing to raise interest rates, we should probably keep that in mind, as well as the forward yield curve and whether that's still appropriate or what rate we should use. Just food for thought.
Precisely.
It's driven off of more long-term rates, but I agree with you that the yield curve's moving up while we're considering moving it down. But
In some ways, that's the perfect time to do it. I mean, if you want to go conservative, I don't know.
all right.
Yeah.
It's
I
worth
agree.
considering anyway.
Yeah. Okay. That brings us back to our agenda item, the presentation by Market Update and Standard & Poor's Credit Scorecard. Welcome.
Good morning.
Morning.
I'm Bill Fazioli. I'm with the firm PFM, and we've been working with the town, I believe, since the early 2000s. I personally have been working with the town since 2011 on its most recent bond financings and credit issues and sort of budget issues in Connecticut as well. So what we do, we're able to work with the town sort of on the years where you're not, I put in the soundtrack myself, so.
But your own background music, that's awesome.
We're able to assist the town in years where it's not doing a bond offering or meeting with the rating agencies to do sort of an interim credit checkup, and we were able to do it this year based on the fiscal 17 audit. So we're happy to provide this to the new administration. I know there's a new team here in the town, so it's a good opportunity for them to see sort of the history of the town's finances and sort of what the current status is. Before I get into it, the good news is that despite all of the issues statewide with the Connecticut budget, the town here is still in an excellent credit position. So I just, if you take away anything from that, is understand that based on the most recent audit, and I assume 18 is shaping up well, the town still maintains a very excellent credit position. So Standard & Poor's and also Moody's, they've developed these sort of scorecards to make it easy to figure out what your bond rating is. Before, it was sort of a very mystic kind of approach. They never really explained what their criteria was. So about a year ago, whoops, here we go.
I don't know why it's so finicky.
Oh, here we go. So basically, they came up with this framework where they've got these categories, and I know it doesn't come up too great on the screen, but I think you've got hard copies where they've got these categories that define your rating, and they have things called institutional framework, economy, management, liquidity, budget performance, and so on. And each one of these has a weighting that they take into account a number of sub-factors and variables that they'll put into a spreadsheet, a model, which we're able to replicate to come up with the indicative rating score. It's sort of a number that comes up like we all have credit scores. Basically, on these categories, you want to be as low as possible. 1 is the strongest and 5 is the weakest score. I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm going to want to spend a little bit more time the ones that's specific to Connecticut, Simsbury here, but this is one that's a little bit noteworthy. This institutional framework sort of is a general score assigned to all Connecticut municipalities that speaks to the governing environment, the predictability of the budget, and so on. Connecticut always had, as a state, had a Category 1 indicator in this criteria, but unfortunately it was lowered last year by S&P because as they said that these towns were operating in a less than predictable budget environment. This was done in July of 17 at the height of the budget uncertainty. They haven't refined that since the last year. They may now that budgets are in place and they've got this municipal assistance board up and running, but so that sort of was a ding, not just to Simsbury, but for all Connecticut communities. So we were very careful when we reran the scenario to take into account what impact this would have on the town's rating. It's only a 10% factor, but it's still something that would represent a weakness from what you were operating last year. We were able to work with S&P in June of 17, right prior to this downward revision in the framework. So, and that's where the town still had its AAA rating back then. So, the economy is something that, again, the town has experienced a little bit of a slippage here. The tax base, took a hit from the 2007. Home values still haven't quite been restored to the 2007 levels. I know there was a recent report issued by, I think, the Hartford Courant had an article that had the home values of all the communities over the last 8 or 9 years, and I think it's only been 5 or 6 in Connecticut have regained their 2007 levels. So I think in 2007, the town's median home value was about $353,000. Right now it's about $310,000 based on the data. So you're making up some ground, but that is a measure of sort of the community's wealth. It's a combination of the property values and the per capita income. So it's still scoring out at 2.5, very, very good. But the other thing that I think S&P and even Moody's is looking towards is sort of the redevelopment of the former Hartford facility, what contribution that will be to the town's tax base and tax levy. So this is an area that is probably the only sort of softening spot, and it's something more to do with the general economy of Connecticut. So. But management, I can't speak enough of the town's very strong financial policies and practices, as evidenced even by this morning, where you under budgeted state revenues either on purpose or by accident, but you're still in a position where you're not looking to close a budget. You've got excess revenues. The town has extremely strong financial policies and practices that are embedded in the charter. They're sustainable. You adhere to them. You don't waver for them. You don't adopt a policy and say, well, we're going to ignore it this year. So, and I know when working with the finance team, the debt policy is something you take very extreme measures to make sure you comply with. And that really does pay dividends when the rating agencies really like to see that. So they're very impressed by that. So budget flexibility, that's just really your fund balance levels as a percent of expenditures, again, exceeding, getting into the category 1, which is, a wonderful score, and you maintain it, even though if you may appropriate your fund balance from year to year, you're able to replenish it through positive operations in the following year. And then again, budgetary performance is really just your your annual operating results, are always above what you budgeted. You're always generating surpluses. So again, that's a very positive indication.
Bill, can you go back to slide 8?
Yep.
So the category 1 is if the fund balance as a percentage of annual expenditures is greater than 15%?
Right. They'll assign a score of 1.
That's consistent with what Maria told us in evaluating our fund balance.
Yeah. I mean,
And has that 15, those categories changed, or those have always
no, that's been
okay.
pretty much, these criteria has been in place in 2012. They haven't modified these. But they do annually look at these and make sure that, are these still realistic? Are they, frankly, there are some communities outside of New England that have fund balances at 30% of expenditures because they have a revenue base, a revenue source that's much more volatile. Here in New England, we have the property tax, which, generally there's not a lot of volatility. So, they do review this, but they've maintained the 15% in these ranges over the last 6 years. But they do reserve the right to modify that based on economic conditions. So,
Okay, thanks.
and then liquidity is really cash. I know the town has a very comfortable cash position. I assume that's still the case. I know in a lot of instances, the town will pre-fund capital expenditures, capital projects, and then reimburse itself through bond proceeds. That probably is a good, a good strategy now as interest rate. You might want to reconsider that as interest rates are rising in a low interest rate environment. It didn't really cost you a lot, but now if you're investing funds at, say, 2%, you might want to think about just going to bond a little bit sooner than earlier. But that just shows the strength of the town's liquidity position, again, being very, very strong. So overall, and debt, again, the debt position here in the town is very good in terms of the amount of the debt that's outstanding and also the debt service as a percent of the budget and expenditures. I know the debt policy here calls for, I believe, is it less than 7%? Yeah, so that's, and you do your bonds in 10 years generally. Extremely conservative, very aggressive. The rating agencies really love that aspect. So when you add it all up, again, this is sort of a quick summary, but they've got these sort of categories, and when you put them all together and you weight them and you make all the below the line adjustments, the town is still netting out at a AAA with Standard & Poor's, and it's something that I think is to be take some pride in, considering all of the fluctuations in the state of Connecticut. The state's had numerous bond downgrades. There's ongoing headline risk about the economic performance of the state, the weak demographic profile, loss of jobs. The town here has really held up over the last 3 or 4 years, and bodes well for future bond offerings. All of this I'll provide with Amy and Maria and Melissa, all the sort of the quantitative backup that makes up these calculations. So, and I think I've actually given you the spreadsheet model where you can actually go in and put your own inputs to see if you did slip in certain areas, how that would impact the rating. So, but just in summary, town's credit profile, the strengths, strong budgetary performance, very strong liquidity, strong debt and liability, that pension liabilities. I know, they might seem large for the town, but relative to other communities in this position, they're somewhat moderate. And the financial practices have been on record as being, well recognized. Going forward, and I spoke to Maria a little bit about this, the Standard & Poor's report indicated they would like to see what the redevelopment of the former Hartford property would add to the town's grand list as that gets put back online. And that I know that there are some larger bond issues, being contemplated for schools and various projects. The rating agencies would be interested to see how the town will manage those financings and what the impact would be on the budget. If you're going to perhaps maybe depart from the debt policy for some of the larger issues, you maybe amortize them over past 10 years, depending on the magnitude of those. I know the town does some forward planning and budget modeling through Excel, so using that would be a great tool to illustrate what the impact on the budget is. And then just sort of global issues. This is the stuff that keeps us all up, at least me up at night, but not many people. Yeah, so sort of the global issues beyond Simsbury. The elimination of the soil deduction at the federal level is something to keep an eye on, especially in the Northeast. S&P just issued a report where it identified Connecticut municipalities being vulnerable because of the high income tax burden, state tax burden, along with some other states. There are some, unfavorable long-term migration shifts in the Northeast here, where younger people are leaving to Arizona and Texas or wherever they're going to go to look for a better job. So the working age population can have some detrimental impacts, not just to Connecticut, but to all of New England. Rising pension and healthcare costs, of course, I'm sure you're very familiar with in your budget. Deferred capital and aging infrastructure, again, is a big issue. Some of the newer threats that the rating agencies are focusing on is cybersecurity. The city of Atlanta was recently compromised, and they, had to, I think, pay a ransom or something like that because somebody hijacked their system. And the S&P in particular is saying that it's a threat in two ways. It can disrupt, essential services, 911. Fire safety, public safety, somebody goes in there and just disables those services, that could be an impact. And also in Atlanta's place, for instance, they weren't able to generate tax bills or invoices for water, so you can't produce that your revenue stream is interrupted. So you have to be mindful of that. But it's more of a global issue, is that municipal governments are having a hard time attracting and retaining IT professionals that really can keep you safeguarded from these threats. My son, was a B student all his life, never really killed himself, and became an IT guy, and he's making more money than I ever thought he'd ever because he's a I just remember he never really applied himself, and next thing he fell into IT, and he gets a call like every day to jobs everywhere, just paying exactly. So I mean. So it's become an issue where I think, because governments obviously don't pay as much as private sector, that this could become a problem long term. And then lastly, S&P and Moody's and everyone else is looking at the acute climate change in two aspects, sort of the acute event. I think a few years ago there were tornadoes and some massive windstorms, ice storms that took place here in the state that led to power outages and disruptive of services, and also gradual climate changes, maybe not for Simsbury, but for coastal communities as sea rise level continues to take place. That could impact property values for some of the coastal communities. Where I live in Rhode Island, there's a number of communities that are, have very, liberal building standards, and you have houses, within 5 feet of high tide. So you got to wonder long term what the impact is that's going to be as the tide continues to rise. So that's sort of the presentation in a quick way, but overall, the town's in very good a place credit-wise, financially-wise. I think it's a tribute to the practices and the policies of 10 or 15 years of good management. And, we're happy to provide this information to the new finance team and continue to monitor it on an annual basis.
Thank you. Just a couple comments. If you're from Brookfield, you know how severely weather can affect you, in an instant. Brookfield, Hamden, a couple of other places. So we had ours 3 or 4 or 5 years before.
2011.
2011. You remember it very well, Lisa.
I do.
So, yeah, we have to be ever vigilant in that. And I will echo what you said about spending on IT. It's a hard thing to budget in a town, the capital expense and the operating expense for talent and equipment and everything else. But we need to be vigilant on that because not having it is much more expensive than paying
Right.
for it.
Absolutely, yeah.
Rob, I'd like to echo that. I think, our last capital budget, we budgeted almost 100,000 towards addressing some of this, but as we move forward on the next budget cycle, I would ask you to convey to Maria the need to really look at this and also shared services with other communities, because
Right.
I think you're right, we're seeing IT people being hired in six figures and to get someone really good.
Right.
And is there a way to do a regional collaboration there? Because I agree with you, Rob. We saw what happened in Farmington. They had an error and it cost $1 million. So we really,
Yeah, we can't be naive that that kind of thing couldn't happen anywhere. So that was $2 million payment. I think everybody remembers that. That was not good. So-
Yeah, no, and at some point, the insurance companies are not going to cover some of those losses, so.
Well, thank you very much. The last comment is that we do have the large capital project, which was approved, and I think we were contemplating that would have a 15-year bonding.
yes.
Okay.
When we come back.
Yeah.
But it was all budgeted out that way, so.
Yep,
And the only
no.
other time we've done that was for the high school.
Exactly, I remember that, yeah. So I know there's a lot of time and consideration that went into that, so we're happy to, continue to provide assistance as
Right.
necessary, so.
Thank you.
All right, great, thank you. Good morning.
Okay, I always do this, I lose my agenda. Do we need to talk about the other communications? We've done that, right?
I think we're all
We're
set,
good?
just informational.
All right, anything else for the order? Motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We're not a quorum.
Well done.
All right, thank you,
I-
guys.
I had heard-
Thank you for coming very early.